be joined a little bit later from Katie Stratton, who's the head of restaurants for Facebook and Instagram. I guess, kick things off by, since March, what's been happening and what's happening in your city. It's funny because we ran a survey through Zagat in May about the future of dining and asked people to talk to us about how they're thinking about dining out and what will be important to them to feel safe dining out again. And as I look back on it, I realized that May was basically like 10 years ago, and that so much has changed even since we surveyed those diners. And I'm sure for each of you, what you're thinking about and how you're thinking about moving forward has probably evolved since this all happened in early March. So maybe Angie, we'll start with you in New York City, and would love to just hear about what you've been doing with Beatrice Inn and since lockdown, how things have evolved for you.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really interesting because I was in London, supposed to be in London actually for a couple weeks, and as soon as everything started really exploding in New York, I canceled everything and came right home. We did make the choice to shut the restaurant down prior to Governor Cuomo mandating that businesses be shut down, but it was only by a day. Our last night of service was Saturday night, the 15th, and then he mandated that businesses shutter on Sunday the 16th. Unlike a lot of businesses, especially in my neighborhood in the West Village, we closed for 4 days. And within those 4 days, we pivoted our entire business from fine dining to takeout. We really went in and, I cooked the food that I would cook my family. I cooked the food that I would cook at home, and switched it to takeout. So, we have been open since day 5 of the shutdown, and have not closed. So, it's been really interesting to see, because I think there's been a lot of businesses that have just shuttered and I think are struggling now to reopen for outdoor dining, because you think about loss of product, loss of staff, where we really retained pretty much everything. I have a staff of 54 people now. When I opened on day 5, it was me and 3 people. We didn't even have a dishwasher, because I wasn't sure how busy we were going to be. And so, we were washing dishes and taking orders and fulfilling everything. And slowly, as the business, the takeout business started to grow, we started to bring employees back one at a time, just based off of what we could afford. I think that I'm glad for the fact that PPP has come along. But I think that, which I'm sure this is something that we'll get into later. But PPP isn't enough. It's not enough to keep small businesses afloat. I think that there's a lot of businesses out there that might be fortunate enough to have, multiple locations or very deep pocket as backers. But even though my restaurant is, in an iconic New York space, and it is fine dining, it's unlike a lot of restaurants where at the end of the day, we're a family-owned business. It's me and my cousin that own the business, and that's it. So, and that is the thing, is that, what a lot of people don't realize is that, businesses such as restaurants carry a very, very high overhead. And there's really not a lot of operating capital in the banks. Sometimes it's a month. If we're lucky, it's 2.5 months of operating capital. And with the lack of responsibility from insurance companies, refusing to pay for business interruption insurance, it's been very, very disastrous. So, I think the landscape as far as in New York goes, we've seen some of the most iconic restaurants in New York shutter and not come back. You think about it, like Lucky Strike in New York, Keith McNally's Lucky Strike. That was a place that I used to go before I even moved to New York. That is permanently shuttered. The fact that Gotham Bar and Grill is permanently shuttered. These are New York institutions. and, in New York, institutions with deep pocket backing. So, I think for a lot of us, for a lot of business owners, a lot of chefs, a lot of restaurateurs, you look at businesses like Gotham Bar and Grill or Keith McNally shuttering businesses, and you think, well, if there's no hope for large restaurateurs, what kind of hope do we have as, as individual restaurant owners?
Yeah.
It's a really scary thing.
And even when you see the big restaurant chains having to go raise more debt to cover their
Hmm.
costs, it's just you realize that there are real systematic issues at hand. Well, thank you for
Absolutely.
that. Melissa, do you want to talk a little bit about Seattle and what's been happening at Musang since we all started this new life together?
Yeah. I mean, coming from a business owner, I opened my restaurant in January of 2020. I was a pop-up restaurant for about 5 years prior. So, I mean, I had already heard rumors, and I have friends living in Italy that were already kind of getting hit with COVID. It's been a really interesting journey. In Seattle, same with Angie, we shut down the 15th, took Sunday off, and then actually pivoted into a community kitchen space. So we operated as a community kitchen, serving food 6 days a week to food insecure families that were affected with school closures, frontline workers as well. And it was really important for us to kind of just look at the community that helped support us to get to the place we needed to open, and see how we could support them because they were the ones that actually got us the space. We operated that way for about a month and a half, 6 days a week doing community meals. And then in month 2, we decided to do takeout. And so we operated takeout 4 days a week, community kitchen 3 days a week. So there's been a huge discussion on our end of how can we keep the community kitchen sustainable while also running a restaurant. Currently now the cases in Washington, like many other states, are rising. And so we just took 2 weeks off. I'm actually in Nevada right now. And just taking time to figure out what kind of is our next move. I had the hopes of coming back next week to opening up to outdoor seating. And now just really looking at, am I being mindful of my staff and their families? I live with, a lot of my staff live in cross-generational homes. So their safety for me is a kind of the utmost importance. If I open the space, am I going to be adding to the numbers of rising COVID cases? I think as a business owner, it's been really difficult kind of looking at all these questions. A lot of us are so excited to just be back in the kitchen cooking our food in ways that are very different. Takeout was never something that I thought we would do, putting our food in boxes or delivery services. And it's just humbling to kind of be in this position and looking at my peers, looking at my community and being like, what do we need to do? From looking at how broken the system is, we've had conversations of the system being broken, but it actually was built this way. And as a small business owner, like I am the only owner in this business, and it's like my family putting their hope and dreams into mine as well. And just making sure that we can be leaders within our community in the way that we make decisions for the restaurant. If I can be someone that can try and at least navigate through this, I think that's kind of where we're at in Seattle. We're all kind of leaning on each other to kind of figure out what we need to do next, because there's not a lot of direction coming from the government, not a lot of direction coming from the public health side. And so how do we reopen and what does that look like is a really big question. And I hope that diners can also have perspective looking at an owner's sense, because we are not only just providing food, but we are risking our lives and our families' lives to be able to give you guys these experiences. And so there is an urgency to, mask up and be mindful and protect those that are serving you. So that's kind of where we're at. Takeout is kind of where we're looking and being creative, doing meal kits, potentially doing live, cooking classes with my staff so that they can share their memories of food. Being really kind of creative in a very interesting world. But yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing that strikes me so much, and something that gives me just so much respect for each of you and everybody in this industry is that, by nature you're all creatives, right? And you're also business owners. And so, to watch people be forced into creative ways to create new businesses is so inspiring, but also just, the sense that, I think you see restaurants really stepping up to serve their communities in a way that other businesses don't. And I think, it's so interesting listening to you guys talk about the pressures that you feel to not only take care of your staff, but also the community. It's really inspiring. So I'd love to talk more about that for sure, but also first want to hear from Curtis about Los Angeles and how you've been navigating.
Yeah, we've had an interesting set of circumstances because we were ordered to close a couple of months ago, which we obviously closed dine-in. We pivoted immediately. We literally got the order, and the order was closed tonight. There was no notice. And then, of course, you walk back into the restaurant the next day and you have a walk-in full of food. So we're lucky enough at Gwen, at least, to have a butcher shop. So we already had customers coming in, and we could hear of the shortages in the grocery stores and things like that. So we sort of said, well, let's put all this food out and give people an opportunity to take some of this stuff home. And it turned out there's a really big demand for eggs and milk and produce and that kind of stuff. So we just kept going with it. We had great relationships with farmers already, and we were sort of thinking, well, they've got no one to sell their food to either. Farmers markets got shut down for a period of time here in LA as well. So we sort of just we literally turned the middle of the dining room into a market. We had people coming through and, self-serving, picking things up. And even that, it feels like, you mentioned before, May seems like years ago. And it does. It seems like a day's a week and a week's a month and a month's a year, and every couple of hours something new happens and you've got to navigate that and try and figure it out as well. We were doing quite well with the market. And then, that question comes up of, are we doing this safely? Are we doing it safely for our team, which is, of course, your first concern. And then you sort of say, well, let's go from a self-serve market to actually give them a piece of paper or something that they can almost, in the same way you go for sushi and you mark down what you want, give us the piece of paper and let us go and fulfill it for you and bring it out. So we sort of tried to cut down how many people were in our space. And we did that, and we did it successfully. It's a challenge, right? You sort of, on that first day, you look at the team and you're like, all right, we had 100 employees at that point. And clearly we couldn't sustain all of those employees. So we had to let a number of them go, or stand them down, furlough them, however you describe it. But we my commitment to them was, I'll do everything I possibly can to get you all back here as fast as possible. And we did that. We offered every single person that we previously employed a job back within 2 or 3 weeks. And it was successful, but the road keeps turning, and that's, up an hour and 20 minutes ago, the governor of California just ordered us to close back down. So, we're in a different position this afternoon than we were this morning. So, and my 2 restaurants are very different as well. Maud's a 24-seat dining room. Now, if you socially distance 24-seat dining room, you're down to 10 or 12 seats. And I just don't know how you do a fine dining restaurant with 10 seats in it. But we were going to try anyway, and we sort of spent the last week gearing up for it. And now, of course, that plan alters again. But look, I think as chefs, the one thing that we hang our hat on is being good multitaskers. That's what cooking is. You constantly have 7 or 8 things happening at the same time, and you've got to prioritize, and you've got to manage, and you've got to know that something's in the oven and this is almost ready to be turned, and that has to be put on the pass, and this needs to be sliced. And that's sort of if this could happen to any industry, ours is probably as good as any for it to happen to, because we can at least think on our feet, pivot, and try and multitask as best we can through it, So we sort of made the decision early on as a team to not sit around and complain about it, and just to get. It's like being in the weeds on a station. If you stand there saying the orders are coming too fast, you're definitely going down. If you just try and systematically weave your way through it, then you've got fighting chance. And we did that as a team, and I'm super proud of them. You know, that entrepreneurial thinking that's come out of the team. What if we try this? What if we try that? And people sort of pulling those ideas together. And God, we must have tried 20 different things in the last 2 months, and not all have worked, and not all have failed. So we're still here to tell the story, I guess, is the best. But yeah, it's we're a little bruised and battered for it, but you just get on with it and do your best.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I'll say it again. It's just so inspiring and you know, impressive to hear about, you know, just the way that each of you have leaned into this and navigated it in a way that really does. It has as much to do with you know, keeping your business alive as it does sort of doing the right thing for the people that, you know, work for you in the community. And I think that's the stuff that I think as we've, you know, for example, with the survey, we saw, you know, from a consumer perspective, they're obviously, I think, you know, at least from the people we speak to, you know, through Zagat, they're obviously people who are really passionate about dining, and I think really want to support restaurants. I mean, we've seen that from, you know, people writing checks to various organizations and just, you know, whether it's GoFundMe's or whatever, trying to support. But I think clearly we saw, you know, that obviously people are concerned for their own health as diners. And I think, you know, the thing that I'm sure you each struggle with so much, and I'd love to just kind of hear from you how you're thinking about it is, you know, you touched on it, Curtis, like, you know, 12 people in a restaurant, obviously that's not going to do the job from the perspective of actually like operating and making money and being able to build a business. And so, you know, beyond a vaccine or some sort of treatment that allows us to be a little less concerned about proximity to others, you know, or maybe just, you know, clarity is like, what do you feel like you each as business owners need? I think what I'm getting at is that to me, it seems that there's one thing that hasn't been happening enough and that seems very inevitable, which is more government support in the form of money. But I have to imagine there's other things that might be on your mind in terms of, you know, whether it's clear guidance or whether it is more money. I just love to know how you're thinking about like whether at the local level or at the federal level, you know, what you think you need as business owners to better be able to support your needs and your community's needs. Maybe Melissa, do you want to tackle that one first?
And I think all of us could agree, yeah, more money would be great. You know, the PPP was great, but that is a short-term kind of band-aid for the longer-term solutions for restaurants and business owners, not just restaurateurs, but small business owners. A lot of the discussions that I've had within my community is just that, like, is there a representation as well for the people like me or the people like us? A lot of, you know, in the beginning of the PPP, there's a lot of backlash because the folks that did get the first round of funding were large corporations that didn't really, you know, maybe, yes, they needed the money, but my biggest fear is if money is distributed, how is it distributed? Will it be distributed evenly? Will it be distributed fairly? I think there's a lot of systems then that can be tackled, like healthcare, and just making our jobs as owners, cooks, front of house, back of house, dishwashers, everyone, this being more like a viable and secure job. I think that's more important in making this sustainable, like our industry in itself, a sustainable industry that can keep providing food and experience to people, whatever that looks like. I know that's been kind of the biggest thing, like vote so that you can get the people in to help you, you know, make the decisions for what can look like or for what local businesses can look like and what you can receive. But yeah, for myself, that's kind of been the biggest thing. Like once the money runs out, what happens next and what kind of guidance will be given next? And so we're just kind of looking within. We're looking within to the communities that support us, that are in our neighborhoods, and making sure, you know, that we take care of each other so that we can hopefully be sustainable and exist after. But yeah, I definitely think there are bigger questions than just money. I mean, like we saw, the PPP was just kind of a Band-Aid. And I hope that we can all kind of collectively talk to each other and look at what we can do as owners that have, you know, these platforms to make bigger changes in this industry in itself.
Yeah, in some ways, it seems like this has just shined such a brighter light on so many of the systematic issues that we have in terms of, you know, inequity and the lack of social safety nets, and you know, certainly clear for your industry, but I think clear for our society at large. Angie, what about you? I mean, is there anything New York
Yep.
specific? I know that there's some
I have a lot of
unique
stuff.
things, unique things to New York, but otherwise, I'd love to hear what you think.
Of course. So I want to touch on what Melissa said. I mean, look, the PPP, it's great, but it's also not great. Because, at the end of the day, it's like, when it was lasting for 8 weeks, it was kind of pointless, because realistically, we were paying people to stay home, which is, and we're messing with people's unemployment, which is the other thing, you know what I mean? So it's great and it's not great. But what really, now that it's been extended to 24 weeks and the differential is, 60/40 payroll to rent, I think that it does a little bit more. But it really, if there is any more money that needs to be released, it needs to be done in the form of grants. I do agree with Melissa in the fact that, a lot of the businesses that, got the PPP money in the first round had no business getting it. Ruth Chris, no business getting it. Potbelly, no business getting it. The same thing with Danny Meyer, no business getting it. And I think those businesses should honestly be ashamed of themselves for pulling one over like that. But there's a lot of other systemic issues within our industry that we do need to address. I don't know how it is in California or Washington. But in New York, we have an 80/20 rule. So, right now, and it's something that de Blasio, who, I've been a very outspoken critic of de Blasio for a long time. But, he is very anti-business, and the 80/20 rule that applies to front-facing servers, to where, front-facing servers have to spend 80% of their time with guests in order for business owners to take a tip credit. So we're not paying $15, but we're able to pay $7.50, and take advantage of that tip credit. That has to go away. The fact that we cannot tip out back of house, even in circumstances such as these, we're in a pandemic. And the fact that I have regular guests, leaving hundreds of dollars, saying, please, this is for you guys. This is for the guys that are in the kitchen, because it's all there was. And you can't tip them out because I'm legally, bound to not be able to. That has to go away. There's always been and for those of us that have been in the restaurant industry for a very long time, there's always a differential between front of house, back of house. There's always, I've worked really, really hard throughout my ownership of my restaurant to kind of bridge that gap between front of house and back of house, and not, and have it really be just, one team, which is fantastic. But, when you think about it, a lot of front of house employees, they're working half the amount of hours that back of house is working, and they're making 4 times the money that back of house is working. And it has to even out. And I think that with some of the new legislation, what I'm hoping is that the 80/20 rule goes away, because right now, so many of the new things that we have to do, the cleaning, the sanitizing, all of that stuff to keep our guests safe as well as our employees safe, that takes so much time that I'll never be able to take a tip credit from my front-facing employees. So, there has to be some sort of balance there. There has to be some sort of legislation that helps business owners, because, restaurants run on such a very thin margin as it is. And we are required to employ so many more people than other businesses. Our labor cost is a lot higher than so many other businesses, just because of the legislation that's put into place, and what we actually need to make a business work. And that, a lot of it has to change. Healthcare is something that's tremendously important right now. And look, the other thing too is that, and unfortunately, this whole pandemic has gone and it's become so political, on top of that. And what we as an industry really need to discuss as well is the fact that, I think if you actually look at stats, it says something like 30% of workers in the restaurant industry are undocumented. I would wager that you're actually looking at, upside of 50%, probably 55, that are undocumented workers. And when you're talking about an industry that is billions of dollars, where 50 to 55% are probably undocumented workers who are not eligible for unemployment, it's really devastating to the economy, truly. And just to human life, just to everybody's existence. So there has to be some sort of protection there.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Mm.
Curtis, anything you want to add?
Yeah, look, I think, exactly what Melissa and Angie both said. It's a fragile business. It always has been a fragile business. We live very close to the line as business operators, and our teams live very close to the line in terms of just a simple, decent, I'm sure Angie and Melissa would concur. You look sometimes at people's paychecks and they're on minimum wage or somewhere close to that, and you look and you think to yourself, "Oh my God, how on earth do they do it? Like how do they get by?" And then you remember the times that you were on that wage, and you recollect how you used to get by. And I mean, I lived in London when I was a commie chef, and I used to jump the fence to catch the train to work because I couldn't afford a ticket, and that's just kind of hospitality for you. It's a tough, fragile business, and I think there's a lot that needs to be done. When you're talking broadly about what happened in this country with COVID, it's nothing short of a disaster. You look at what other countries have done and how they've managed it, but compared with how we have, and like the proof is always in the pudding, right? The results always speak for themselves. And look at our results; they're just ghastly, and we still lead most conversations with an economic perspective, as opposed to people are dying and people's families have got loved ones that are now missing, and we don't even start the conversation with that. We start the conversation with, should we open up? Should we have to wear masks? And it's just such nonsense that you get really frustrated with it, and you kind of, I mean, I'm not going to lie, I was frustrated today when I hear the news that we have to close again. I'm not frustrated that we have to close. If that's the safe thing to do, then that's what we should do. I wish that when they made the decision, they gave us a couple of days heads up so we could, work through the inventory that we have in the walk-in and again try and take care of the people as best we possibly can. But it's a state of emergency in many ways, and you've got to sort of treat it like that. But yeah, I think that there's so many issues and problems politically that it's hard to know where to begin. Yeah,
I mean, Melissa, you touched on it. It's like that idea that actually the system isn't broken, it's working as designed, and that's the problem, right? I mean, it's, the economic sort of perspective first, and irrespective of public health or anything else, I think is so much of what's making this harder, quite frankly. Well, that's a really great insight, and I thank you for each of you, contributing your perspective there. I do. This is a good opportunity, I think, to bring in Katie Stratton to the discussion. So Katie should be joining us. There she is. Hi, Katie. Katie's the U.S. head of industry for restaurants at Facebook and Instagram, and obviously is who we partnered with on this discussion. So thank you for bringing this all together. And I'd love to, bring in your point of view. Obviously, you're talking to restaurants, on a daily basis, and would love to just sort of, from your point of view here, what you're seeing and hearing. And, obviously we've got, 3 points of view that are all pretty similar, and I think we're hitting on some trends, but would love to just kind of hear more from your perspective on trends you're seeing out there and what you're seeing businesses do as they try to adapt.
Yeah, absolutely. I think first and foremost, we're seeing and hearing that consumers and customers miss their dining routines. They miss going to their favorite restaurants. They miss grabbing their coffee on the way to work, lunch out with coworkers. They miss happy hours. They miss date nights. They desperately miss their favorite restaurants. And they're being forced to cook more at home. And this is challenging because there's food shortages in the grocery stores, and the supply chains have issues. And quite frankly, there's a lack of cooking expertise, right? Most of us are not chefs, and we try our best, but we miss our restaurants. So the trends that we're seeing across Facebook and Instagram are really that consumers are seeking variety between needing to cook at home and finding a way to get their favorite food from their favorite restaurants. And this is primarily takeout and delivery. And as time has gone on, consumers are gaining more and more confidence here in food delivery services. And I know this wasn't always a part of every restaurant's routine, but it's becoming a part of everyone's everyday lives. The biggest shift here is really in dine out experiences. So when we talk about dine out, we're talking about things like curbside and drive-through and delivery and buy online and pick up in store. Some of this shift to the dine out model was already sort of starting to happen pre-pandemic, but I do think the pandemic accelerated that. And really one of the things that has supercharged that has been our mobile devices. Mobile has been the key to the driver of this trend in the midst of the pandemic, and it's changing the way that restaurants are doing business. And it's heightening our consumer expectations of restaurants. And if you put it in perspective in terms of us all being sheltered in place and in our homes, the only way to really connect or discover with restaurants is through these mobile devices and through our media consumption. And the average US adult spends over 3 hours a day on their smartphone. And in terms of media consumption across all of their devices, 1 in 3 minutes is consumed on a mobile device. And I caveat that with this was pre-pandemic data. We're going to have new data coming out soon on this, but what we're seeing here in terms of these dine out trends, they appear to be new to COVID. They aren't necessarily new, but they've been exponentially accelerated.
No question. I think that actually brings up one question that I'm just thinking of right now that I think is actually pretty relevant, which is, for the three of you who run these businesses, what role does the technology play in this for you? I mean, clearly it's essential in terms of, consumer habits, but, building product and technology that can serve your business is tricky and difficult. And obviously that plays itself out from the, POS systems to the restaurant delivery platforms and everything in between. Have you felt like, technology has been helpful for you? Have you found that it's been frustrating have you wanted more from your, whether it's your POS partners or otherwise? Like how does that play out as you guys are changing the nature of your business and starting to sell, take away groceries or, do delivery or takeout in a situation which you weren't doing it before?
Yeah. Do you guys mind if I start with that? So, look, as somebody who had never done delivery before, look, I've always worked in fine dining. I've never done delivery before. We opened up on Tuesday for our first day of outdoor dining, and I literally cried because I was plating a steak on China. I was so excited that it wasn't going in a to-go box. But, look, I partnered with Caviar at the very beginning, and I have to say that, for a smaller company that is a startup, I think they're doing a really fantastic job. I think that, out of all the delivery companies that I could have partnered with, I'm so glad that I ended up with them. They are one of the few companies that really stepped up and said, look, we're not going to charge you any sort of fees for the first X amount of time because we know that restaurants are hurting and we want you to be a partner long term. I always say this with any situation, like friendships, employees, lovers, anything. It's like, look, when shit hits the fan, that's when who you should be doing business with, who you want to employ. It's not when things are good. It's when shit hits the fan. And that's when And I have to say, I'm going to call them out. Uber, ridiculous. Seamless, Grubhub, ridiculous. Postmates, ridiculous. I was running as a business owner, I was running into situations where, we only were using Caviar, and I had delivery drivers coming saying, I have this order from Postmates, where is it? And they were random menus. And so I really spent the majority of my day calling Seamless, calling Grubhub, calling Postmates, calling Uber Eats, saying, I don't even do business with you. And people are and it's a scam. And then when I finally did look into doing business with them, they're looking at, you're looking at 30% commissions. there's no hope for any business, especially the restaurant industry, to ever turn a profit. So, I think that one of the things that I think, especially from a consumer standpoint, because I have guests all the time that are like, what can we do to help you? We want to support you. Call your restaurants directly. Call your restaurants directly. Go down and pick up the order yourself. Know what services you're using. But services like Uber Eats, Postmates, and Grubhub and Seamless, it's really, really shameful that they took a pandemic where, takeout business was the only way that restaurants had, that was our only lifeline to survive, right? And it's really, really shameful what they did. And it's even more shameful that it took, I know in New York, I don't know about in LA, but I know in New York, it took 3 months to get any regulation on capping fees on what they could take. And that's just, it's kind of one of those things. And I'm very old school, right? I'm very old school, and I only do business with people that I like. And this is kind of, I think this experience for a lot of us, for a lot of restaurateurs especially, has really shown us who we're going to be doing business with in the future and who we're not. And it really shows us, where we want to put our money, who we want to do business with, who I want to write checks to. And I think the same thing should be said for consumers as well, is who do you want to give your money to? You want to give your money to the businesses that are doing right by others and are really there supporting businesses. So, I think that's very important to look at. Look, I haven't taken an Uber since, so there's that.
Curtis, Melissa, I mean, anything to add there? And I would even say, something that I think is interesting to think about too is how this plays a role in reopening and, contactless menus. There's so many things that really do become, you see technology needing to fit into that, right? But it's difficult to know how that's going to work. So anything else, on the technology front you'd like to add in?
I mean, I
After
think,
you, Melissa.
oh, go ahead. Okay, thank you. I think definitely echoing everything Angie said, like the percentage fees, once they're actually stated, are mind-boggling, and consumers definitely need to understand, like 30%, there's no profit left over for like restaurateurs after this. Pick up the phone, show up. You're talking about technology. We've been blessed with a POS partner system that immediately was able to create an online ordering platform for us with really low fees, so that was helpful. But yeah, that's huge. Technology is a huge role. Katie representing Facebook and Instagram, like right now is a very sensitive time. And if you're talking about technology in terms of marketing your business, like I recently took over my social media for the restaurant, and how do you, especially in times like now, be sensitive to what is happening, especially in the United States, and promoting your food as well. And it's really difficult. Like I cannot press enough on consumers to be respectful on that. Like the last thing that I want to do is flood people with my food on their social media streams to promote my business when there are larger, much larger problems that we are facing right now. And so it's just really difficult. I understand that for us, technology is of utmost importance for our business to run. Like as much as I'd like it to be old school with, community showing up, knocking on the door, like it can't be that way. And so just finding that delicate balance of continuing education for the consumer and continuing education of what we're actually really facing. Because, it would be great. Like I can order food, I can do all this stuff at home, but from that perspective, like there are a lot more bigger questions that we need to be asking and answering too. And just that respect side, like 100%. That's what we've been navigating, especially in Seattle. We were, a lot of people lobbied to get that 15% cap on businesses, which we were grateful for, but it's still not enough. Showing up to support your small businesses is huge. And yeah, just respect of the space, especially now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we were always a business that didn't have much to do with technology, to be honest. We still have handwritten checks in our restaurants, and we'd never used an app. And, I couldn't fathom how you put a 10-course menu into a cardboard box and send it to someone. But we, like everybody else, just had to change and adapt, and we put down the tweezers and started cooking comfort food. And we actually set up a website which cost us very little money, but it's called Gwen to Go. I was about to buy a new car before all this happened, and I'm now the proud owner of a Mercedes. It's a refrigerated van, but it's still a new car. And we've got waiters and dishwashers who are actually now our delivery guys, and we pick and pack from everything that we purchase, farmers market produce, of course, our meat from the butcher shop, and everything else, the dry staples and the dairy, and we deliver to people. So, we're probably 10 or 15% more expensive than going to a grocery store, but our stuff's fresher, it's better quality. And like you say, it's a small business. I think the interesting thing between Angie, Melissa, and I is we all own our businesses. We don't have investors, or maybe it's a partnership with a family member or whatever. But we don't have, most restaurants are owned by 10, invisible people, and then there's the chef or whoever is sort of the front person for it. But when it is yours, you've just got to do what it takes to make it happen. And a part of, what Melissa mentioned, spreading the word is really important. Like, I wish everybody knew what we were doing here in LA, because I think it's a pretty cool service that you can have beautiful food delivered to your door, both cooked chicken pot pies as well as organic avocados. But trying to spread that word again is sort of sensitive, because when you've got big important things happening in the country, and you're standing in the corner waving your flag saying, "Have a look at the cottage pie I just made." Sometimes you don't actually even want to talk about it, but there is a need. And as things continue to change, today in Los Angeles, people won't be going out for dinner, but they still need good food delivered to them. So we're going to just try and pivot and put our energy back into that right place. And I'm not. It took me 10 minutes to join this call, so I'm not one to boast about my technological, I can't even say it, my technological abilities. But, it's a part of doing business these days, and you've got to figure it out. You've got to be digital, and we're trying our best, I guess.
Certainly. I think kind of related to that, the last question I'm going to ask, and then I want to get to a few questions that were submitted by the audience previous to this, but Katie, you touched on it a little bit, and we're all kind of swirling around, each of you and so many other restaurants have had to just become creative in terms of these new businesses, right? And even, takeout and delivery being unique for so many restaurants that weren't doing that before. And certainly we're seeing these shifts in consumer demand. I mean, even through the Zagat survey that we did, we saw, huge spikes in cooking at home, huge spikes in ordering delivery and takeout. And I think, I was talking to a restaurateur in New York about this a couple of weeks ago, because I was kind of trying to figure out, like, what do you think, what parts of this do you think are here to stay forever? And what he said to me was that he didn't want to think about that, because that means that, like, we're not going back to, what we all want, which is our normal ability to go into restaurants and have dining experiences inside the restaurant. But I do think it's pretty clear some of these things are going to continue on. Maybe there are good things that can continue on. I think, Melissa, you even mentioned, cooking classes that your staff can provide, and hopefully maybe find some ways to earn some money that way, or at least, build an audience that way. And I don't know. I mean, I'd love to start with Katie. Are you seeing sort of consumer trends that you think might be interesting? And then would love to just kind of get each of your opinion on what parts of these new businesses may be here to stay.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think from where we can see these trends coming to life now, it's really about future-proofing our businesses, because we don't know what the next 6 months or 6 days might look like. I think Curtis, your example was really clear on that, right? Expecting to open, and then all of a sudden you can't. So how can we future-proof our business as best as possible? And I know that is extremely challenging, especially for small businesses. But what we're seeing is a real focus on a digital strategy. Understanding to be mindful of when you're going to be sharing messaging, in what way, on what platform, but a digital strategy in some capacity so that your customers can discover you. I almost think of this as, I lived in New York City for almost 15 years. I recently moved to New Jersey, and I think about, walking through the West Village and browsing the menus on the street and checking out Angie's restaurant, right? And I think this applies to any main street or town center where customers will come to eat. Right now, while we're home and we're thinking about future proofing for the next however long that is, how can our digital strategy help take the place of that behavior that we just don't have right now. So how can we help customers discover us and remember us? So the most important thing is really to just be where your customer is online. Just be there. The places they're spending their time, that's where you want to spend your time, and that's where you want to communicate with them. And then the messages that you're communicating, I mean, regardless of what's going on around us, I always say this to my team: everybody eats, right? Everybody eats, and it's very comforting, and people want to engage with their favorite restaurants and eat at these restaurants right now. So messaging in terms of what is your dine in versus dine out experience right now, and that's going to shift as time goes on. So being really consistent with that messaging, how you're taking safety protocols into consideration, thinking about things like building in potentially seating times. These are things that we're hearing from the industry to make sure people feel really confident in coming in when they can. And then in terms of the dine out experience, I think messages to your customers just about items that offer variety to what they are cooking at home, because people are very bored with what they're cooking at home. And that's going to have to include menu items that travel well for the time being. But it can also include really unique experiences. I think Melissa was talking about meal kits. We're seeing a lot about meal kits right now. People are really interested in them. If they can't have their favorite meal from their favorite chefs like Curtis and Melissa and Angie, maybe they could have a meal kit that's prepared by them with instructions on how to bring this meal to life for their own family. Or even family style meals. That's another one that we're seeing a lot of. Instead of sort of calling up the restaurant or placing your order online with single items, how can we just make this easier for customers and have a family style meal? So I think overall, just putting some real thought into what is your presence, what is your digital strategy so that your customers can find you and can discover you and can know what you're doing so that you're always top of mind for them.
Absolutely. Curtis, I know, you had mentioned that, you were able to pretty quickly move to selling things from the walk-in because you had a, butcher setup. Are there things you think that will sort of fundamentally be part of your business forever that you might not have wanted to or thought about doing before this?
Yeah, it's fascinating to stop and think how, we had a butcher shop that literally sold meat. We make all our own charcuterie, and that was it. We sell lard and that, like a few little simple things that we cooked. But since we've started actually cooking and putting that stuff in the butcher shop, it's actually evolved into a market. So now we have all sorts of simple things that we're making. I think Angie might have said the things that you would normally make for your family, chilies and pies and, simple stuff like that. And our customers have really warmed to it. So I think it's there to stay. I think if I tried to remove our chicken pot pie out of the butcher shop, there'd be a line out of protest. So, we welcome that. But yeah, it's cool, isn't it? You sort of,
Yeah.
actually just having a look at what you've been doing, Melissa, and there's lots of, I wish I could get it to the house. It looks delicious. And I think that's sort of something nice that we've been able to show our guests, that it's not just about fine dining, and it's not just about spending lots of money and coming into restaurants. We're capable of other things too, and we've enjoyed that. Even our wine team, we haven't been selling a whole lot of wine up until I said, we've got a great cellar, we've got incredible sommeliers, put together suggestions for people, and we've done like 6 different rosés and explained them a little bit, and people can choose what they are. And turns out that our prices are really competitive with what other people are getting from liquor stores and grocery stores. And it's like beautifully procured, lists of things that we can pull together. So we're even offering wine consultancy as a service through that Gwendigo site I was telling you about. So it's like, I think that stuff hopefully does stick around post-pandemic.
Absolutely. So Angie, are you going to keep selling the chicken pot pies for in perpetuity now?
I might have to because it's so funny, Curtis. You've got that on your menu. Like because I've always had a meat pie on the menu, but never chicken pot pie. And yeah, I'm doing chicken and vegetable pies now. So they might have to stay.
And Melissa, what about you? I mean, the community kitchen part of this is so interesting and amazing. And I know you mentioned sort of right now thinking about, okay, reopening the restaurant more fully, but also keeping that intact? Well, how are you thinking about that?
I mean, I think it just, if we can start now, right? It's kind of a blank slate for us to start fresh. Like we've come up with so many different business plans from day one, from where we started to where we are now. If I can continue the community kitchen to be an aspect of Musang, like 100%. Angie had talked about grants. We were fortunate enough to receive grants in order to support this aspect to our business. And I think if we can sustain that 100%, food insecurity is not going to go away, especially in this time. And I think that needs to be something that, we look at. And if we have the opportunities and we have the space to do such, we should. If I can operate 4 days a week, keep my lights on, and then operate 3 days a week to be able to feed my community, absolutely. We've looked at ways to, menu pricing has been something that's been a huge topic. How can we integrate, an add-on of $10 that can provide meals for people within the community? Or, a little bit of story of Musang, like we were funded by the people that support us. We were able to raise a lot of money to build the restaurant. When we asked for donations for people to continue to feed the community, like we were able to raise a lot of money because people see that is such a necessity in this space and time. So I do have this hope, and we'll continue to drive forward with that to make sure that's sustainable. And it also, is a way to employ people that I haven't been able to employ. That is a job opportunity in itself for people to cook these meals for people. But yeah, I mean, the definite creative side is 100%, like juggling community kitchen with takeout, with meal kits, with how do we do this? But, like Curtis said earlier, like out of all the people in this industry, we know how to multitask, we know how to be in the weeds and come out of it. And I really hope that, through these discussions that I hope continue to happen within our communities in itself, that it can show we can hopefully create a different future for this industry.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I will say just again, to listen to each of you talk so much about not only keeping your business alive, but also doing something for your community, right? And the community of obviously your staff, but also just, it's so amazing as you watch, who are the people feeding the frontline workers? Well, it's the restaurants, right? And it's the restaurateurs. And, I think that's the thing that became so apparent, if it wasn't already through all of this, is just the role that restaurants play in our communities, whether it's in good times or bad. And so just hearing each of you sort of talk about having to not only manage the bottom line, but also do more and to contribute more, positivity into the world is super inspiring. And so thank you all for that. But you actually hit on one thing that was a common thread in a few of the audience questions that we got. So we'll close with this, and it's just interesting that it was in a few questions, is that there are a few questions about, I think obviously consumers understand that the economics of restaurants are changing very quickly right now, and that none of it looks very good, especially as it relates to the high cost of rent and the issues that you're all going to face in terms of capacity and everything else. And there were a few questions about, do you think about, are you going to have to raise the prices of your food or of your wine, or of the cost of dining in order to, like, could you even do that in a way that would make up for the social distancing laws and the things like that you're going to have to navigate? So it sounds like, Melissa, you were sort of thinking about it as a way to keep the community part of this going, but even just as you think about keeping your business going in a situation in which you can't be at full capacity, do you see the cost of going to restaurants increasing drastically? You want to start with that, Melissa, since you kind of teed it up?
I mean, it's definitely been the biggest question, right? I think it's interesting. We're a Filipino restaurant. Already we're facing folks dealing with, especially ethnic and Asian cuisines, quantity versus quality. So that presents an extra layer to this. Like, if I'm going to raise my prices in order to hit my margins, we're already dealing, and we have been dealing with that, since opening. We had a lot of folks that were like, I can't believe, we're paying this much for Filipino food. And you're just like, well, I'm trying to give value to a culture and cuisine that has been far lost for a really long time. And in order to be able to look at future generations, to give them the confidence in ourself and our food, 100% it starts there. having to talk about even furthering prices, gosh, it's, that's something that we've been studying and looking at right now. We've included price increases due to like PPE, like gloves, masks, all of these things that we never had to pay for before, but now we're paying for them now. And that's all included in, the buy lines on the menu. Like, we have these price increases due to, staff healthcare or extra, all these extra things that we've had to pay for. I hope that, and I'm working really hard to not have to increase my prices exorbitantly, because we are such a community-based place. Like, we've opened with the hope of accessibility and education for the people and our food, and so it's a big question. And I know that the answer is yes. Menu prices are going to go up in order to cover costs that we never thought of. But, I think there's also a way to have discussions and dialogues, hopefully with your rent, like with your building owners, or, the bigger picture questions of like, I didn't sign a 15-year lease with the numbers that I'm now making, going back and having those kind of discussions too, because it's like, if I'm going to look at, my my lease and the projections that I'm making right now, I'm sure that it would be a very different story. But yeah, the answer to the question is yes. Menu prices will change, and consumers definitely have to be mindful and hopefully understanding and supportive of that. And that's part of that continued education that I hope we can build. Yeah.
Absolutely. Angie, anything to add there?
It's really interesting. I actually have not raised my prices. I've lowered my prices. But my restaurant, obviously it's an expensive meal. Pre-COVID, we were looking at, an average per person price of $160, $165 a person. And I just, because look, like, my restaurant is a restaurant where, the ducks get lit on fire at the table, and, I have chef de salons filleting fish, tableside, and they're carving beef tableside. Like, I can't do that anymore, just due to the fact of, all of these new guidelines that have been put into place to keep our guests safe, as well as to keep us safe as well. And, so when we reopened last week for outdoor dining, I thought, okay, fine. I have to reimagine my entire menu. And, I have to say, from a creative standpoint, I think it's actually kind of amazing in that respect. I try not to be, too much of a cynic. I try and always look at the glass, half full. And I think really the big silver lining on this entire pandemic has been the fact that, as a business owner, as a creative, you get to, you now kind of get to look at your business and say, okay, what if I could do it all over? What would I change right now? If I want it, and I've been wanting to scrap my menu for a really long time, for probably about a year now, because I've really kind of seen the change in the way diners are eating right now. And we've seen it coming for a long time. It needs to be a little bit more accessible, but it still needs to feel luxe. It still needs to feel like an occasion. It still needs to feel like New York. But a little bit more attainable versus aspirational. And, I think the Beatrice has very much, since I've taken it over, been a very aspirational restaurant. And that's fine, because that's what I've made it to be. But in reopening last week, in preparing to reopen, I thought, okay, what do I want to eat right now? Because during this entire shutdown, all I've been cooking for everybody is not my regular menu, but I've been cooking the things that I want to eat. I've been cooking the things that I want to cook my family. I've been cooking comfort food, the food that gets you right here, right? And I thought, great, we're going to do outdoor dining in New York, and during the entire month of June, I'm typically in Europe. So I thought, I can't go to Europe this year, and who knows when I'll be able to go to Europe. So I'm going to bring Europe to West 12th Street. So, if you walk down West 12th, the entire length of the sidewalk outside of my building is lined in hibiscus and hydrangeas. And, there's still white linen tablecloths because it still is the Beatrice, pandemic or no. But we've switched the menu to instead of these like big, 65, 70-ounce steaks, we're talking individual plates that are, between 36 to 42, $45. So we've actually cut down our menu pricing and changed the portion sizing and changed the way we cook. But, in order to make up for that, because, we still have West Village rent to pay, you're talking about a different type of dining experience now. So instead of these, elongated 4-hour leisurely Last Supper style meals, it is everybody has to order an appetizer and an entree, and there's an allotted time at the table. And quite, look, I mean, I think it's kind of known in this industry that I never have a problem saying no to anybody. It certainly hasn't not changed now, especially because I only have 10 tables, to make money off of. So, it really is, okay, well, you don't want to order an appetizer and an entree, doors over there, I'll fill the table like that. You know what I mean? And so it's a different kind of dining experience. And I've gotten pushback maybe once over the past week with that policy, but the majority of diners, they understand, I think how hard the restaurant industry has been hit. And the ones that don't understand, they probably never worked in the restaurant industry.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, it's just a great illustration of how much the entire dining experience is changing and has changed. Curtis, anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
We I guess we haven't really changed our pricing structure necessarily, but what we have found is our diners are spending more money. So, we sort of try and always give our guests the opportunity to spend as much as they want or as little as we can afford to still put the food on the plate. And, we've certainly seen an uptick in the more expensive wines on our list and the Wagyu beef that we offer. And I'm not sure whether that's a short-term thing, whether the guest is sort of just happy to be out for a change, or whether it's a support-based thing where people are sort of supporting their local restaurant. I've always sort of been a big advocate for restaurants increasing their prices. I think if you do the math and you go to a grocery store and you wander around and you buy the ingredients to cook a nice meal, and it costs about the same amount of money to do that as it does to go and have someone cook it for you, something is fundamentally wrong. Restaurants are very competitive in terms of the way they price, and they work off very thin margins. We're seeing some of the results of that right now, a little wrinkle in the system where some of our business disappears for a minute and we all go broke, and that's not a great way to operate a business, not only from a business owner's perspective, but also your team. I don't like paying people minimum wage. I think the minimum wage is too small. And when there was a big push for raising the minimum wage, a lot of restaurant owners were anti it because they saw it as a block for them to be able to operate the business. But I was a big supporter of it because I'm like, you shouldn't pay someone $15 an hour. It's not enough money to live off. It's not enough money to have a family, to run a car, just the simple necessities of life. And I think as an industry, we have to strive for more for our team. And we shouldn't have to write on a menu, we're charging you a little extra so we can give health insurance to our employees. I mean, it's ridiculous. We should treat it as a profession, and that's what it needs to be seen as. And we need to be able to pay our people properly. And to do that, you've got to charge the right amount of money, which is a struggle because it's competitive. So if you try and charge too much and no one else does, then you sink. So we're talking before about some of those bigger issues, restaurant issues that we all would love to see addressed. And right now we're all fighting for survival, but hopefully we come out of this stronger and as a industry can sit down and figure some stuff out because it needs to be solved.
Yeah.
But Curtis, don't you think that that's such an American thing though, to, we've got this minimum wage thing, whereas look, if you or I opened up a restaurant up in Europe, you know what I mean, is barely any tipping in France. And it's, it's an insult if you leave more than a couple francs on the table because, in Europe, serving people, it is a profession, and it's highly regarded. And I think that at some point America probably has to make that shift. You know what I mean? Where there has to be a shift where it's like there's a very, it's a respected, dignified, profession to be in, and we need to value that, and I think I think that we as restaurateurs and service industry people, we value that and we see that. I don't know if the rest of American society really does at this point.
No, you're absolutely. I mean, we classify McDonald's as a restaurant. We classify 11 Madison
Yes.
Park as a. They're not the same thing,
Exactly.
Yeah, you're so right.
Well, and I think, and I think this is a sort of a good way to maybe wrap this up, is it just seems that, the one thing when you talk about a place like France is there's also universal health care, there's social safety nets that, at least from the things that we see, and anytime we have conversations with, people in the restaurant industry, it's like, until some of those things really change, it's going to be really hard to, see the rest of this work out. You as restaurateurs should not have the entirety of, someone's livelihood so resting on your shoulders completely. There should be social safety nets for people who need healthcare and who need, better education and all those things. And I think, what we've seen is that there's so many great ways, and just to sort of leave this with the, people who are watching, there's so many great ways that you can support restaurants and restaurateurs. And really the best way you can do that is to go spend your money with restaurants in your neighborhood and beyond. But also, I think, look, there are organizations like the Independent, Restaurant Coalition who's trying to lobby, the government. And I think, calling your local representative is a big part of that. But there does need to be some more sort of organized effort, I think. And, Katie, I think you have something to sort of mention on that front as well.
Yeah, no, we totally agree. And one of the other trends, that we didn't get to talk about was consumers wanting to say, we want to support businesses who are doing good in our community. A lot of what Melissa was talking about with community kitchens. So Facebook, we did make a donation as well to the IRC, and we hope that others will join us. And we thank you for tuning in and hearing. And we thank Curtis, Melissa, and Angie for sharing your points of view.
Yeah, really. Thank you guys so much for your time as well. I know, it's very valuable right now, so we appreciate you coming and talking with us, and good luck with everything. However we, at Zagat can be supportive, we're happy to be, and really just thank you again for joining us.
You're so welcome. And Chris, we thank you too. Zagat's always a big supporter of our industry, and without people like you, we'd be a little voiceless. So thank you, and thanks, Katie. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Have
you.
a great rest of your evening, and take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.